The hotel lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that only expensive places have. Soft piano music floated through the air. Crystal chandeliers glowed above marble floors. Guests moved slowly, confidently, like they belonged. Steven Seagal walked in alone. No entourage. No assistants. No flashy outfit. Just a long dark coat, calm posture, and eyes that had seen power before, even if no one here recognized it. She paused for a moment, taking in the lobby. Then she approached the front desk. The receptionist glanced up, then down, then back up again. Her smile faded. She looked at Steven's clothes, then her shoes, then her face. Something about Steven didn't fit the picture in her head of a luxury guest. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone already defensive. "Yes," Steven replied calmly. "I have a reservation." The receptionist clicked on her keyboard for less than 2 seconds, then stopped. "Name?" "Seagal." The receptionist frowned. She looked at the screen, then laughed softly. "I don't see anything here." Steven remained polite. "That's strange. It should be under tonight." The receptionist leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Ma'am, this is a private hotel," she said. "Guests don't just walk in off the street." A few nearby guests turned their heads. Steven felt the shift in the room. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said evenly. "I'm just checking in." The receptionist signaled to a nearby manager. He walked over, confident, sharp suit, irritated expression. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, without looking at Steven. "She says she has a reservation," the receptionist smirked. The manager finally looked at Steven. He scanned her from head to toe. Then he sighed. "This hotel caters to a certain standard," he said coldly. "And you don't appear to meet it." Steven's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. "I'd like to speak to the general manager," she said. The manager laughed. "Security," he called out loudly. 2 guards approached immediately. "Escort her outside," the manager said. "She's disturbing the guests." Phones slowly came out. Whispers filled the lobby. Steven didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. As she was guided toward the exit, she stopped just before the glass doors. She turned back calmly and said one sentence. "You might want to be very careful about what you do next." The manager rolled his eyes. The doors closed behind her. What none of them knew was that they had just kicked the owner of the hotel out of her own building. And in exactly 9 minutes, everything would change. The glass doors slid shut behind Steven Seagal. The warmth of the lobby disappeared instantly, replaced by the cold night air. Inside, the manager straightened his jacket like he had just won something. "Finally," he muttered. "Some people just don't know their place." The security guards stood taller, pleased with themselves. Outside, Steven didn't move. She stood under the hotel's glowing sign, hands relaxed at her sides, breathing calmly, as if she were waiting for a car, not being thrown out of her own property. One of the guards crossed his arms and smirked. "You can't stand here," he said. "This is private property." Steven met his eyes. "Is it?" she asked quietly. The guard scoffed. "Don't start." A few guests lingered near the entrance, pretending to check their phones while secretly recording. Something about Steven's calm felt unusual. Most people would argue, plead, get angry. She did none of that. Instead, Steven reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She dialed one number. It rang once. "Give me 9 minutes," she said calmly into the phone. "Yes. I'm outside." She ended the call. The guard laughed. 9 minutes for what? Back up. Steven didn't answer. Inside the hotel, the manager watched through the glass doors, shaking his head. "Another faker," he told the receptionist. "They always think confidence can buy them respect." The receptionist giggled nervously. But not everyone was comfortable. A bellhop whispered to a colleague, "Why isn't she upset?" A housekeeper glanced toward the entrance, uneasy. Steven checked her watch. 7 minutes left. One of the guards stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look," he said, pretending to be helpful. "If you leave now, we won't call the police." Steven looked at him, not angrily, not fearfully. Simply steady. "You already made your choice," she said. "I'm just letting you finish it." The guard frowned. "Who do you think you are?" he snapped. Steven didn't answer that either. Instead, she looked past him, at the hotel she had built from the ground up years ago. Every light, every floor, every corner. She remembered the meetings, the inspections, the promises. "This place will be different," they had said. Inside, the manager received a notification on his tablet. An email. Subject line: urgent, unscheduled executive arrival. He frowned and ignored it. Outside, more phones were recording now. A guest whispered, "This is getting uncomfortable." Steven checked her watch again. 4 minutes left. A sleek black car turned onto the street. Then another behind it. The guards noticed. Their smiles faded. Inside, the receptionist's screen refreshed. A name appeared. Her hands began to shake. "Sir," she whispered to the manager, "I think you need to see this." The manager waved her off. Outside, Steven stood exactly where she was, calm, composed. 3 minutes left. And the people who laughed the loudest were about to regret it the most. The first black car slowed to a stop across the street. Then another pulled in behind it. The hotel's golden lights reflected off their polished hoods. The security guards noticed immediately. Their joking stopped. Their posture stiffened. "Probably a VIP guest," one guard muttered, trying to sound confident. Steven Seagal didn't react. She stood exactly where she was, hands loosely clasped, eyes calm, like someone who had waited much longer than 9 minutes in her life. Inside the hotel, the manager paced behind the front desk. He checked his watch, annoyed. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Why is she still standing there?" The receptionist didn't answer. Her eyes were glued to her screen. The email notification blinked again. "Urgent. Executive arrival confirmed." She swallowed. "Sir," she said quietly, "maybe we should double-check the reservation." The manager scoffed. "There is no reservation," he snapped. "She's bluffing." Outside, one of the guards stepped closer to Steven, his voice sharper now. "You need to leave the premises," he said. "Last warning." Steven turned her head slightly toward him. "Do you know why places like this fail?" she asked calmly. The guard blinked. "What?" "Because people confuse authority with entitlement," she replied. He didn't like that. His jaw tightened. "You're crossing a line," he warned. Steven nodded once. "Yes," she said. "And so did you." A small crowd had gathered now. Guests, passers-by, even hotel staff pretending not to watch. Phones were raised openly. No one was laughing anymore. Inside, a junior supervisor whispered to a colleague, "This feels wrong." Another staff member said nothing, but quietly started recording as well. Steven checked her watch. 2 minutes left. The manager finally looked through the glass doors again. He noticed the cars. Not just one, 3 now. Men in tailored suits stepped out, scanning the area. His stomach tightened. "Who are they?" he muttered. Outside, the guard straightened, suddenly unsure who they were supposed to impress. One of the suited men glanced toward Steven. He paused, then nodded, respectfully. The guards saw it. Confusion flickered across their faces. Steven remained composed. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She was waiting. Inside, the receptionist's hands trembled as she pulled up the internal database again. The name filled the screen clearly now. Seagal, Steven, owner/executive chair. Her breath caught. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. "Sir," she whispered urgently, She's listed as." The manager turned, irritated. "As what?" Before she could finish, one of the suited men entered the lobby. Silence fell instantly. "Good evening," he said calmly. "Why is Ms. Seagal standing outside?" The manager froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Outside, Steven checked her watch again. 30 seconds. The guards shifted nervously. One of them swallowed hard. "Ma'am," he said, suddenly polite. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." Steven looked at him, not triumphantly, not cruelly. Just steadily. "There usually is," she said. "But misunderstandings reveal character." The glass doors opened. The suited man stepped out. "Ms. Seagal," he said respectfully, "we're ready when you are." The guards stepped back instantly. The crowd murmured. Phones shook as people realized what they were witnessing. Steven took one slow step toward the entrance. Then she stopped. She turned to the small crowd gathered behind the barricade. And for the first time, she spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let me ask you something," she said. "Have you ever been judged, disrespected, or underestimated just because of how you looked? If yes, comment below where you're watching from and what happened." She turned back toward the hotel. Her 9 minutes were almost over, and the people inside had no idea how expensive those minutes were about to become. The lobby felt different the moment Steven Seagal stepped back inside. Not louder. Not chaotic. Heavier. Every footstep echoed against the marble floor like a countdown no one wanted to hear. Guests who had been pretending not to watch now stood openly still. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the piano music felt too loud, then suddenly cut off. The manager forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am," he said quickly, straightening his tie. "There's been a misunderstanding. Please." Steven raised one hand gently. "Let's not rush," she said calmly. "I waited 9 minutes. You can spare a few seconds." Her voice wasn't sharp. That somehow made it worse. The suited man stood slightly behind her, hands folded, saying nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone had already stripped the manager of his confidence. The receptionist remained frozen, eyes wide, staring at her screen as if it might disappear if she looked away. Behind the desk, the words still glowed clearly. Owner/executive chair. A housekeeper near the elevators whispered a prayer under her breath. One of the security guards avoided eye contact completely now, suddenly fascinated by the floor tiles. Steven slowly turned her gaze across the lobby. Not accusing. Not threatening. Observing. "This is a beautiful hotel," she said quietly. "I remember approving these floors. The lighting too." The manager's face drained of color. "You remember?" he asked, voice cracking just slightly. Steven nodded once. "I do." A guest near the seating area leaned toward another and whispered, "She sounds like she owns the place." Another replied, "I think she does." The manager cleared his throat and tried to regain control. "If you'll just come with me," he said quickly, "we can discuss this privately." Steven met his eyes. "Private conversations don't erase public behavior," she replied. The words hit harder than any raised voice ever could. She turned slightly toward the receptionist. "May I?" she asked. The receptionist nodded frantically and stepped aside. Steven placed her hands on the desk, the same desk where moments earlier she had been laughed at. She leaned forward just enough to make the manager uncomfortable. "When someone walks into a place you represent," Steven said evenly, "you don't get to decide their worth based on appearance." No one spoke. Even the air felt tense. Steven straightened and continued. "I built this hotel so people would feel welcome, respected, safe." She paused. "What I saw tonight was none of that." The manager swallowed. I wasn't aware of your identity," he said weakly. Steven tilted her head slightly. "That's exactly the problem." Behind them, more suited executives entered quietly, lining the edge of the lobby. Each one nodded respectfully toward Steven. Each one made the manager shrink further into himself. The security guards exchanged nervous looks. One of them whispered, "We messed up." Steven turned toward the guards. "You followed instructions," she said. "That doesn't excuse them, but it explains you." The guard's shoulders sagged with relief and shame at the same time. She then looked back at the manager. "But leadership," she continued, "is not about instructions. It's about judgment." The manager's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Steven glanced at her watch. 9 minutes had passed. She exhaled softly. "Let's go upstairs," she said. "Everyone involved." The manager stiffened. "Upstairs?" he echoed. "Yes," Steven replied. "To the executive floor." The crowd murmured again. Guests leaned forward. Phones zoomed in. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was turning into consequences. As they moved toward the elevators, Steven paused once more and looked back at the lobby. "Let this be clear," she said calmly. "This isn't about revenge." She met the eyes of several staff members who were trembling. "It's about accountability." The elevator doors slid open. Steven stepped inside first. The manager followed slowly, every confident step from earlier now replaced with uncertainty. The doors closed. And everyone in that lobby knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, no one was walking away unchanged. The elevator doors closed softly. Inside, no one spoke. The ride to the executive floor felt much longer than it actually was. The manager stared at the digital numbers above the door, watching them climb, wishing they would stop. Steven Seagal stood calmly near the front, hands folded, posture relaxed. She wasn't trying to intimidate anyone, yet somehow the silence around her was heavier than shouting. When the doors opened, the executive floor greeted them with quiet elegance. Private offices. Glass walls. A long conference room at the end of the hall. Steven walked forward without hesitation. She didn't ask where to go. She already knew. Inside the conference room, she took a seat at the head of the table. Only then did the others realize something unsettling. That seat was hers. The regional director stood respectfully to the side. 2 senior executives entered behind him, nodding toward Steven before taking their places. The manager hesitated. "Sit," Steven said calmly. He obeyed immediately. Steven placed her phone on the table and tapped the screen. A large monitor lit up on the wall. Security footage. The lobby. The front desk. The moment she walked in. Everyone watched in silence as the video played. The receptionist's expression. The smirk. The manager's dismissive tone. Then the call to security. The escort. Steven paused the footage just as she was being led toward the door. She looked directly at the manager. "Do you remember this moment?" she asked. He nodded slowly, his throat tight. "Yes." "What were you thinking?" she asked. He opened his mouth. Closed it. "I thought," he began, then stopped. Steven waited. "I thought she didn't belong," he finally said. Steven nodded once. "That," she replied, "is exactly what you thought." She let the words settle. Then she continued. "Not because of behavior. Not because of policy. But because of appearance." No one argued. Steven tapped the screen again. Another file appeared. Complaints. Dates. Times. Names. "This isn't the first time," she said quietly. The manager's shoulders slumped. "These reports were escalated," Steven continued. "And ignored." She turned to one of the executives. "Why?" The executive shifted uncomfortably. "He met performance targets," he said. "Revenue was strong." Steven looked back at the manager. "So profit excused conduct?" she asked. He shook his head quickly. "No, I mean—" Steven raised a hand. "Let me be clear," she said. "Revenue never outweighs dignity." She leaned forward slightly. "When I built this hotel, I made one rule above all others." She paused. "Everyone who walks through those doors deserves respect." The room was silent. Steven turned to the security footage again, this time showing her standing outside. The guards' laughter. The pointing. The smirks. Steven stopped the video. "One of you said," she noted calmly, "people like you always try this trick." The security guard flinched. Steven looked at him. "What did you mean by that?" The guard swallowed hard. I assumed," he began. Steven nodded gently. Yes, she said. You assumed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. But the weight of her words pressed down on everyone in the room. She turned back to the manager. You didn't ask who I was, she said. You didn't check properly. You didn't listen. Her eyes locked onto his. You judged. The manager's voice broke. I was wrong, he said quietly. I see that now. Steven held his gaze. Do you? She asked. He nodded. Yes. Steven leaned back in her chair. Then understand this, she said. Tonight wasn't about me. She gestured toward the screen. It was about every person who walked in here before me and left feeling small. She stood slowly. The room followed her movement instinctively. I don't fire people because they make mistakes, she said. I fire people when they refuse to learn from them. She looked around the table. And tonight, she continued, taught me everything I needed to know. No one interrupted. No one dared. Steven picked up her phone. I'll make my decision now, she said calmly. And in that moment, everyone understood. The mistake hadn't been kicking her out. The mistake had been believing they could get away with it. Steven Seagal didn't speak right away. She stood at the head of the table, phone in her hand, eyes moving slowly from one face to another. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls themselves were listening. Finally, she sat back down. This won't take long, she said calmly. The manager swallowed hard. Steven tapped her phone again. A document appeared on the screen, an internal audit report. Over the last 18 months, she said, this hotel received 26 formal complaints. She paused. 18 of them involved staff behavior. The manager's head dropped. Steven continued. Guests ignored. Assumptions made. People spoken to with contempt. She looked directly at him. Does this sound familiar? He nodded slowly. Yes. Steven turned to the executives. Why was this allowed to continue? One of them cleared his throat. We believed retraining would be enough. Steven tilted her head. And was it? No one answered. She exhaled softly. Leadership is not about second chances without change, she said. It's about responsibility. She slid another file onto the screen. Security reports. Tonight, she continued, security acted without verification, mocked a guest, and escalated instead of de-escalating. The guards stood rigid, eyes forward. Steven addressed them calmly. You were given authority, she said. Authority requires judgment. She paused, then added, you will be suspended pending review. The guards nodded silently. Steven turned back to the manager. As for you, she said evenly, your position ends tonight. The words landed without force, but with finality. The manager closed his eyes. I understand, he said quietly. Steven didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. HR will process your termination immediately, she continued. Your access is revoked. She turned to the regional director. You'll assume interim control. Yes, ma'am, he replied instantly. Steven stood again. But firing people doesn't fix culture, she said. Changing it does. She walked slowly around the table. Tomorrow morning, she continued, every department will attend mandatory training. She stopped behind the receptionist, who was shaking. Steven's voice softened. This isn't about fear, she said. It's about awareness. The receptionist nodded, tears forming. Steven returned to her seat. This hotel will be audited from top to bottom, she said. Every policy, every procedure. She looked at the executives. And if I find more behavior like this, she added, I will not hesitate to clean house again. No one doubted her. She picked up her coat. We're done here, Steven said. As they exited the conference room, word had already spread downstairs. Guests whispered. Staff stood frozen. The manager was escorted quietly toward a side exit. No announcements. No spectacle. Just consequences. Steven stepped back into the lobby. The same place where she had been humiliated minutes earlier. Now, everyone stood straighter. The receptionist bowed her head respectfully. "Miss Seagal," she said. "I'm sorry." Steven nodded once. "Learn from it," she replied. "That's enough." Outside, the night air felt calmer. Steven paused at the entrance and looked back one last time. "Remember this," she said to the staff nearby. "Respect doesn't start when you recognize power." She opened the door. "It starts when you don't." She walked out. Behind her, the hotel stood silent, not because of fear, but because something had finally changed. By morning, the story was everywhere. Short clips, shaky phone videos, whispers turned into headlines. Hotel owner kicked out by her own staff. People replayed the footage again and again, not because of anger, but because of how calm she was. Steven Seagal standing outside her own hotel. Hands relaxed. Voice steady. Waiting. Comments flooded in. She never raised her voice. That's real power. They judged her and paid the price. Inside the hotel, things were already changing. New management arrived before sunrise. Security uniforms were replaced. Staff gathered in the conference hall, nervous, silent, listening. The regional director stood at the front. "This hotel is under new leadership," he announced. "And under new standards." No applause. Just understanding. Later that afternoon, Steven returned quietly. No cameras this time. No attention. She walked through the lobby slowly, observing. Staff greeted guests respectfully. Security opened doors without judgment. The atmosphere felt lighter, not perfect, but aware. Steven stopped near the front desk. The same desk where she had been laughed at. The receptionist looked up, nervous. Steven smiled gently. "How's your day going?" she asked. The receptionist swallowed, then answered honestly. "Better," she said. "And clearer." Steven nodded. "That's all improvement ever is," she replied. Outside the hotel, the viral moment continued to grow. Influencers talked about it. News panels debated it. People shared their own stories of being underestimated. Steven didn't give interviews. She didn't explain herself. Instead, she released one short written statement. It appeared online that evening. "This story isn't about a hotel. It's about how easily people forget respect. When they believe they have power. Judge behavior, not appearance. That's how dignity survives." Millions read it. And thousands felt seen. That night, a former guest returned to the hotel. Someone who had once been ignored. Dismissed. Made to feel small. This time, the doors opened wide. "Welcome," the staff said warmly. The guest smiled. Not because of luxury, but because of respect. Steven stood on the balcony of the executive floor, looking down at the city lights. She didn't feel victorious. She felt responsible. Power wasn't about control. It was about example. She turned away from the glass and picked up her coat. Tomorrow, there would be meetings, audits, work. But tonight, there was peace. Because one thing had been made clear, not just in one hotel, but to millions watching. You never know who you're standing in front of. So treat everyone like they matter. If this story reminded you that respect should never depend on appearance, type respect in the comments. And subscribe for more powerful fictional stories that expose arrogance, highlight dignity, and prove one truth. Character always speaks louder than status.